Hey guys, so I have a 2019 Yamaha YZ450FX. Recently had some issues starting the bike. Had several unrelated, or maybe related, unrelated, I'm not sure, issues. It was kind of difficult to diagnose, so I figured I'd make this video to help somebody out in case you're having similar issues. My issue started when I was riding and I ran the bike out of fuel. Once I got it filled up, it didn't want to start again. So I wasn't really sure what the issue was, but the first issue I had with the bike not starting after I filled it up, after running out of gas, was actually the fuel pump connections. So the fuel pump inside the gas tank has like a little float, and that float came loose, maybe because there's no fuel in the tank and I was moving the bike around. It came loose from the fuel pump and it pulled the fuel pump electrical connectors out of the spade connector. So once I pulled the fuel pump, thinking I was gonna need to replace it, I realized it had just been disconnected. So I reconnected it and it was good to go. However, before my next ride, I went to start it again to warm it up, and it didn't want to start. So that was a completely separate issue. I did some electrical troubleshooting and traced it down to the starter relay. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I ended up with 3 issues, all within like a week, trying to start this bike. The first issue was inside this fuel tank. There's a fuel pump. It's got a float that's used to measure the indicate low fuel warning, because you do have a low fuel warning light up here. So that flow actually came loose when I ran the bike out of gas, probably because I didn't have enough gas, and it's a float that's just kind of hanging around, and I guess it came loose and it pulled the connector out of the fuel pump. So if you're having issues starting your bike, if it's cranking but won't turn on, that's a good one to check. The second issue I had, once that got going, within about a week, the bike wouldn't crank at all. I could just hear like a noise, and sometimes it would make a noise coming from this area, sometimes it wouldn't, but it would not crank. So I started doing some electrical troubleshooting. Of course, I checked the fuses. There's a fuse here, there's a fuse here, there's a fuse behind this panel. All the fuses were good. Troubleshooting led me next to, of course, the battery was good. Troubleshooting next led me to the relays. So this has 3 relays, 1, 2, and then the third one is under here. This whole thing is a relay. And so that was the next part I checked. I checked those 2, those were fine. This relay, which is, I believe, is the starter relay, was actually bad. And the way you test that is in the manual. It tells you for the starter relay, you want to hook up the positive battery terminal to the brown and white wire, and the negative battery terminal to the light blue wire. And then you check continuity on the probes, on the prongs. So here and here is where you check continuity, and you remove this plug, and you can see there's a blue wire there, there's a brown and white wire there. So where you see those wires connecting to the prongs on the relay, that's where you hook up the positive and battery terminals. And I just used some alligator clamps and powered that up, and then tested continuity here, and this relay was bad. So once I replaced that relay, it was like $40 for the OEM relay online. Once I replaced the relay, I could hear the relay clicking when I was hitting the starter button, but it still wouldn't turn on. So, you know, the other things that I could have checked would have been the diodes, but those don't have any moving parts. So I didn't figure that was the issue. So I didn't mess with the diodes. The next step I did was I went to look at the starter. So the starter is right there. So I took the starter out. I had to remove the exhaust, I had to remove this engine mount, and then I removed the lower shock bolt, which would be this one, just so I could get enough room to push the shock back to get this exhaust pipe out. Because I just removed this section. I removed this section on the other side, the whole exhaust. Basically, this was the only piece that stayed in, and then I was able to get the starter out. I tested the starter out of the bike using the battery, connecting a ground to the starter body, and then the positive terminal to the starter electrical connector right there, and it was fine. It spun. I did notice that the electrical connector was corroded, had a lot of mud and crud. I cleaned it up. I put anti-seize on it. Probably should have put dielectric grease, but I put it back and hit the starter button, and it worked. So I think what it was is just that my connection here was so dirty, grimy, and just corroded that it probably was insulating, and I wasn't getting any electricity to the starter. And when I cleaned it up, pulled it and cleaned it up, it cleaned up the connection, and it was fine. So just something to keep in mind is that it was 3 separate issues that I had that all hit me within about a week. So it was a bit tricky to diagnose, but hopefully that helps somebody out.